Newt Gingrich walked into a minefield this weekend. Now, I have a little bit of filler here to add because, oddly, I had mentioned this to my son and I got the whoop. Newt Gingrich was Speaker of the House during the 90s, and he'd led somewhat of a mini revolution to try to get government spending down and government in check. Very milk toast stuff compared to what we are doing today, but it looked like something at the time. So, back to this minefield he walked into. Now, I saw the point he was trying to make, but he made it very badly. Newt said, as we debate legal immigrants opposed to illegal immigration, it is well to remember that the Union Army, which preserved the Union in the Civil War, was about one-fourth the entire army. Without the 200,000 Germans, 150,000 Irish, 45,000 British, and 50,000 Canadians, and tens of thousands from other smaller groups, the United States would have failed and the South would have succeeded in seceding and preserving slavery. We owe a lot to our legal immigrant neighbors. And typical response was, so, we're celebrating the federal government importing hundreds of thousands of foreign mercenaries to make war on our own people now? This is a good thing? I don't think this is the flex you think it is. Now, I do like Newt. I consider him kind of a semi-tragic figure of sorts. He seemed to have wanted to launch a Trump-style revolution in the 90s, and for the most part, it fizzled. Legacy media was still strongly in control at the time. GOP progressives undermined him at every point, and he was left in the awkward situation at the end of embracing the failure or trying to sell the small results he did make as some sort of big win. Well, essentially, that's what he tried to do. He tried to turn very small gains into a revolutionary victory, and essentially he kind of faded from the political landscape. He was always buzzing around the background. People brought him in to speak on things because of where he had come from, but for the most part, he'd kind of disappeared. Well, he reappeared, clinging to Trump's coattails, kind of being a bridge back to an old-timey day when conservatism knew their place at the back of the bus. The first problem is Newt came from a genteel area where certain narratives were sacrosanct. In the era of establishment media control. In that time period, back in the waybacks in the 90s, slavery could only have ended by civil war. There's no other way it could happen, is there? So when your only choice is civil war or slavery, well, you obviously have to choose civil war. So then you can justify everything. Hundreds of thousands of dead, decades of economic setback is a pretty fair price to get rid of slavery. Of course, there's always been a counter narrative. And for most of the last several decades, this counter narrative was ridiculed. It goes kind of like this: slavery died out peacefully in every other country except the United States and maybe Haiti, but that was kind of a different direction. It is arguable that slavery would have died out in the US within a generation or two. So maybe 600 to 900,000 people didn't have to die to make slavery go away. Maybe the entire economy of the South didn't need to be destroyed, causing almost a century of poverty. Maybe massive government overreach wasn't necessary. Maybe former slaves would have integrated more seamlessly if slavery dwindled rather than abruptly ended one day. Our modern distributed media now carries this counter narrative to a wide group of people. Newt, being a senior citizen, isn't aware that unauthorized opinions now roam freely in the wild. So Newt is saying 200,000 Germans, 150,000 Irish, and a bunch of other groups were needed to curb stomp the South. And so the result of him saying that and him getting major pushback is legitimate. If we look at the time period, it isn't as halcyon, might not be the right term for the middle of a war, but uh, the idea that everybody was on the same page uh, is not factual. Northerners were evading the draft. There were draft riots in the North. New York was the most famous one, Port Washington, Wisconsin, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Boston, Detroit, Charleston, Illinois. And these weren't pussy riots like Kent State, where a bunch of commies tricked some stoners into believing the National Guard had no ammunition. No, this was like the army being told to restore order at all costs and the crowd standing up to them nonetheless. In New York, the Navy shelled the city from offshore, bombed the city, killing hundreds. Perhaps over 1,000 died. These draft riots had soldiers attempting to enforce orders killed by the mobs. So it was deadly serious. If we look at the states of Delaware, Kentucky, Maryland, and Missouri, the only reason these states stayed in the Union is because they were occupied by federal forces. The federal army had to keep them in the Union. In short, this wasn't a wildly popular war in the North. Now, unlike alt history stuff, which is fun to read, there really was no path to victory for the South. The best the South could have hoped for was to essentially become independent. And ironically, if I'm using ironically correctly here, this would have actually caused the rapid end of slavery due to the fact that the new Confederate States of America would be boarding the United States of America, a country that didn't have very much slavery. And once their union was dissolved, the North would no longer have an obligation to return escaped slaves. The South's slaves would eventually run away until the point where slavery was economically useless. So, Newt is actually probably right. Based on the reluctance of a lot of Northerners to get involved in this war, and the fact the South was willing to go all in, there's a good chance the North's war would have ran out of steam without a huge influx of foreigners to finish the war for them against fellow Americans. Now, part of our early traditions against standing armies was so that we would have militias instead, which would act as a check against the government. A militia that refused to deploy against fellow citizens probably was an indication that the government had overstepped its bounds. If that same government brought in foreigners to complete the job, well, sounds pretty un American, doesn't it? Because of Newt's "ow my balls" moment, he missed the chance to execute a question to jumpstart the discussion that really needs to happen. At the moment, we're coasting along, basically reacting to one immigrant horror story after another. We have stories of H-1B visa holders crowding out and gaming the system and taking out high-paying American jobs. We have stories of essentially illiterate Indian peasant truck drivers killing people on the interstate. Essentially, each one of these new immigrant incidents, which keep happening, creates a new class of people that people are legitimately advocating probably don't need to be here or need to be vetted in a completely different way. Fair enough. But we do really need to be discussing, and this is why I think Newt was trying to get to but fumbled horribly, is we need to start talking about what immigration should look like. Basically, what does the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years look like? Rather than reacting to each new immigrant horror story that drops. Because if all we're doing is reacting to various incidents, that's not much of a plan. And it doesn't help set a narrative. Now, scope of that narrative is way beyond what I want to do in this video. I just wanted to kind of point this out. So, in the comments below, did anyone hear about this Newt Gingrich thing? Anyone know who Newt is? What's your opinion? Is the counter narrative to the Civil War just completely off base? Or does it have a legitimate stand as well as the originalist view of Civil War? All right, please smash the like button. If the YouTube algorithm has brought you here and you're not a regular subscriber, please check out my other titles. You will find things you will like. You should subscribe. And if you know someone who might find this interesting, please share it with them. Thank you for spending time with me this evening. Hope to see you again in a future video.